if you didn't see it, Netflix has been getting into the live sports arena. They're using MVP promotions. Jake Paul and those business partners are really pushing this. They have a good working relationship with Netflix. And Netflix wants to get into live sports. I don't blame them. Live sports is kind of the only thing that players, or I should say, I'm sorry, that I should say viewers, it's the only thing that viewers consistently watch live. Even network TV at this point, it's streaming, it's watch it later, it's, it comes out tonight, maybe they'll watch it within the first few minutes, but people aren't necessarily, even with the big shows that are on, NBC or ABC, CBS at night, they're not really watching those live. They're then going to Paramount Plus or Peacock or name your streaming system and watching them after they've come out. Sports is kind of the one outlier to that. People will still get in front of a TV live to watch sports, and there's a lot of advantageous aspects to having live viewership as far as advertising and spend and how long you can get people to sit in front of a TV for and pay attention and all of these different things. So they're getting into live sports. I think it's great, honestly. Competition is good. And this was their first attempt at an MMA event. So they got kind of an interesting card here. Rousey Carano being the headliner main fight. None of these were necessarily for belts. But they were real fights. I will say that. They were definitely real fights. To give a little backstory, the UFC kind of has a monopoly, right, on MMA right now. And they're trying to get it in boxing. And there's, kind of two schools of thought. On one hand, you have the UFC model, and on the other, you have kind of more the traditional boxing model. The traditional boxing model gets people paid more money. But arguably, it also gets less total people paid real money, if that makes sense. So you kind of have a situation on the boxing side where, you got to be your own promoter to an extent. I'm not saying literally your own promoter, but you got to promote yourself, build enough of a following to sell a big fight. You got to know how to sell your own big fights. Because there are so many promoters, because there are multiple belts, different, WBC, etc., etc. There is competition. So the best fighters, the most popular fighters, the Mayweathers, the Canelos, Tyson Furies, Deontay Wilder. We got 3 of those matchups between him and Fury. These players of recent memory, these fighters, they're able to shop around a little bit, get kind of the most advantageous fight because the promoter wants to have one of them as the headliners. That way, they can sell the full card, right? You get a great headliner, people will buy the card, and then you fill it with what you hope will be good fights, with fighters that can, start building a reputation because, oh yeah, I remember that guy. He fought on the, the Canelo card. Oh yeah, I remember. I watched the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight, and this guy was on the undercard. I remember that guy. I'll check it out. And hopefully they can build and have some great moments in that card that then, makes the next Mayweather, the next Canelo, the next Fury, the next, etc. That's one way of doing it. And it's worked for a very long time, but it definitely skews towards paying a smaller number of people a much larger amount of money. And to be fair, I want to be very clear. We need to make sure these fighters are paid as much as possible. What they're doing is incredibly dangerous. And it's not something you can do, day in, day out for decades and decades. We rarely are seeing, you're not having the 40-year career, right? This is not a normal job. So that window of opportunity to really get paid, you got to maximize it. And boxing kind of allows that. UFC, they do it a little differently because there's not really a competition. Yes, there's the PFL. There are other places you can fight UFC or MMA, but MMA and UFC is kind of synonymous as, Bellator, etc. You can go around. These other leagues, for the most part, kind of feel like AAA. AAA baseball. You're not in the majors. You got to get to the UFC if you want the real fights. We don't look at, the PFL belt the same way we look at a UFC belt. We don't look at those other leagues. Unlike boxing, where you can have a couple of different belts, we talk about the unified belts where somebody has all of them. That's obviously more impressive, but different belts have some level of, mystique and recognition that is somewhat equal. We might say we think a fighter's better than another, but we don't necessarily discredit a specific belt. Or shall we say maybe even in the reverse of that, we don't credit a specific belt the way we do over in MMA with the UFC belts. What the UFC allows, though, is more fighters getting paid something. A UFC contract comes with quite a few nice guarantees. You're not reliant necessarily on promoting yourself. The UFC is going to kind of just do it. Obviously, the people that are going to make the most money and be the most popular, you got to promote yourself in the fight sport. That's just a thing. But you don't have to go find your own promoter or, shop around. You just get placed on cards. You sign a contract for a certain number of fights. There's a level of consistency there that you can know will be there. And from a fan perspective, there's a certain level of understanding when it's a UFC card that there's going to be a certain level of quality is kind of the idea. And that's the reputation that UFC has built. And that's how they sell their cards. They don't necessarily need Mayweather to be on every card to sell, huge pay-per-view. Now, again, UFC moves away from pay-per-view recently with this deal with Paramount. Lot of discussions about fighter pay recently, especially with Dana, CEO of the UFC, looking him business partners. They're getting into boxing, wanting to try and kind of do the same thing. Boxing fans are understandably worried about fighter pay and having a monopoly and on all of these things. What will it do? So here comes MVP Promotions. Jake Paul has, love him or hate him, you have to respect that he has done a pretty good job promoting fights in boxing. Are some of them very much Mickey Mouse fights? Are they good fights? I don't know, but he does get people to watch. He found a partner in Netflix that is hungry for the content, and he's promoting it to them. So MVP comes along and says, hey, and if you watch the card and you hear Jake Paul talk about it after, he just kept reiterating, he's like, we are showing that we can compete with the UFC. We want to compete with the UFC. We want to give fighters another option, a better option where we're going to take care of them. Fighter pay, fighter health, etc., etc., etc. That was the pitch. That's the pitch from Jake Paul and his, promotion team and, business partners and whatnot. The question is, did they? Did they put on a product that competes with the UFC? The answer is not even close. And I say this in a little bit of, an unfortunate situation here, but like, I would like there to be some competition. I think anytime there's competition, it forces people to improve. It works out better for fight fans, I think. It works out better for fighters too, right? But we've seen the numbers as far as pay has come out. Nobody's really making more money than UFC, necessarily. It's a bit of a, this is supposed to be a bit of a super card. Let's be honest here. We have some names, Junior De Los Santos, Francis Ngannou, Nate Diaz and Mike Perry, Ronda Rousey, Gina Carano. I mean, these two are huge stars. Huge stars. But I will say, watching this main card, and, I didn't actually get a chance to watch as much of the undercard on this one as normally I do. But, this is a super fight. A main card supposed to be incredible. I'm looking here. This fight was, I'd argue, slightly tough to watch. I mean, Junior Dos Santos is incredibly old at this point. This fight, we had 4 straight knockouts, 5 straight. I think we had 5 straight submission or finishes, right? Multiple of which came in the first round. And what is that a sign of? When fights end that quickly, it is one of two things, typically. Number one, somebody got real lucky. You just caught him on an unfortunate punch or a kick or something. The other option is it is a completely lopsided matchup where one fighter is just infinitely better than the other. And that's, to me, how most of this card felt. The other thing that I would argue is I think 2 of these fighters, to me, stood out as, I'd actually like to see them in the UFC. And that's Francis Ngannou and Mike Perry. I think Francis Ngannou is probably still capable of being a heavyweight contender. And with the way the UFC is right now, with the heavyweight division, it'd be nice to have him in there as, a real option with John Jones seemingly not being able to come to terms on a fight deal right now. Francis Ngannou would be a great name. And then Mike Perry's just an incredibly violent fighter, and his fights are pretty much always entertaining to some level. And I do think he could compete at welterweight in the UFC. to some extent. Is he belt worthy? Probably not, but maybe. Francis Ngannou looks like he could compete for a belt. He's realistically, to me, the only one that looks like, oh yeah, I think he'd have a serious chance at the belt. But he's fighting Felipe Lins. I gotta go full cam for this. Felipe Lins is not even a heavyweight traditionally. He went up to go fight Ngannou. Realistically, he took a giant chunk of change, much more than he would have been able to get fighting, I believe he's a PFL. You know, I love that they say dangerous and durable. Like, they're prepping you that Ngannou is about to absolutely annihilate this guy. And hopefully he's durable enough to make it, interesting to some extent. No, he didn't. Ngannou beat the crap out of him. Very quickly, very easily. Good for Felipe Lins. He got paid probably more money than he's ever made in his career, and more money than he would ever normally be capable of making. But this guy's not on an Ngannou level. Then we got to the main event of the evening. Rousey Carano. And to me, this continued the trend and the experience that the rest of the card was. Fun in names. Okay on paper. But it felt a little gimmicky. It felt a little Jake Paul, Mike Tyson. Like, great. Rousey and Carano. Two really recognizable names. I remember Carano, isn't she in The Mandalorian? And two legends in the female fight space. Let's be honest. Carano, even older. But realistically, we're looking at two women who are long out of their primes, retired for a while at this point from fight sports. And I mean, Carano had to lose 100 pounds, which, great on her. That's super impressive. But that just shows you she's not in like fight shape, in fight mode right now. And it feels like a gimmicky fight. It just did. Ronda did exactly what she did in the UFC for a very long time. And that's submit people really, really, really fast. People complaining about, oh gosh, the fight, the main event took 15 seconds. What's ironic is that is the same complaint that Rousey had, people had against Rousey back in the UFC. I remember a time in the UFC when Rousey was just beating everybody so quickly, submitting everybody so quickly, that people were arguing. They're like, are UFC pay-per-views worth it? Because the fights never last very long. It was kind of this era. McGregor knocked out a couple people in a few seconds. Rousey, is submitting everybody in a few seconds and knocking people out in a few seconds. Do you buy a UFC card anymore? Because you're going to be able to see the whole fight in 15-second highlight. You didn't miss anything. You literally get to see the whole fight in, a 30-second clip. Was that a real concern for the UFC? Are pay-per-views worth it anymore? And what does Rousey do? Exactly the same thing. She submits Gina instantly. And then, Twitter gets mad about Oh man, that was boring. What the fight's already over. We didn't even really get to see a fight. I mean, Gina throws one kick, leg grab, game over, armbar. Hello, welcome back, Ronda Rousey. But to be honest, that's exactly what we expected to happen. So overall, was this good for the sport? Probably. It is probably good to have some level of a competitor, but these were not interesting fights. You know, if this was a pay-per-view, I don't think I would have bought it. I have Netflix, so I watched it. It was great. But if they want to compete with the UFC, they got to find a way to actually get some real talent and build it up. Now, I know this is the first one, and they want to do more. And you got to start somewhere. And starting with some big names to get some buzz. I know it pulled a fairly big number. I think if I go back here, 17 million they released. Um, MVP saying 12.4 million. That's a good number. It averaged 12.4 million. It looks like from the headlines here. That is a good number for a card. Maybe we don't really have numbers, I don't think, from the UFC on their most recent cards, but it does get eyes. I do think Netflix's production is very good. It's gotten much better. The days of stuttering are kind of gone for the most part there. But we gotta get some real fights because you know we can love Nate Diaz, but he got absolutely annihilated. He looked incredibly tired almost immediately. Ngannou is just in a different. I mean, he's literally in a different weight class normally than Felipe Lins. There, you need a little bit of excitement and a little bit of a I don't know what's going to happen tonight. I I knew Junior Dos Santos was not going to win that fight. He's too old. He's been retired. Like, what are we doing? I knew Ngannou was going to win that fight. I, it was part of me going, maybe Nate'll, he's a gritty fighter. Maybe he'll have a chance. Mike Perry was always going to win that fight. Rousey Carano, betting Ronda Rousey to submit Carano in the first round probably is one of the easiest predictions you could have made. We knew that was going to happen. Carano's a decent striker, and Rousey historically has not had a great chin. But to think that Gina would ever get off any punches, it's not going to happen. Rousey's just going to take her down, and Gina does not have the takedown defense to defend. So, future of UFC, future of MVP in the MMA. All right, MVP, you did your celebrity card. I mean, that's really what this felt like. It felt like a celebrity boxing card. Not necessarily great top level fighters. Maybe outside of Ngannou. I think he's the only real top level fighter. Maybe Mike Perry could compete in a UFC type of situation, but outside of that, nah. It's not like I'm all of a sudden hoping Rousey or Carano jumps over to the UFC and fights for a belt. No. They're not fighting for a belt at featherweight in the UFC. It's not happening. They're not. It's a celebrity fighting. It's a celebrity fight night. That's what this felt like. Now that you've done it, you got your number, you prove that you can pull it off, you prove that you can, get the refs, get the infrastructure, build a. You got the machine moving. You use some big names, some celebrities, essentially, to promote it, to get people to remember, oh yeah, Netflix has fight sports. Sounds good. Now you're going to need to make a real card with real fighters that really are contenders. The unfortunate part is the UFC has all the contracts. And that is the disappointing thing. If you're a fight fan, that is a bit disappointing. In boxing, we'd be able to get these fights theoretically, right? You get enough money, you get the right people involved. You can maybe make this happen, but the UFC just has a monopoly on fighters. And it's going to be hard to break that monopoly. And then what do you think about the fight sports? I do want to talk, and I think we'll do this maybe tomorrow, about the White House card coming up. And I also want to talk about the UFC and the Paramount and why I think the last few UFC cards have been disappointing on announcement. They've been fantastic, in my opinion, from an actual fight sport, fight fan watching. They've been pretty good. Did we love Charles Oliveira just dominating from a grappling and wrestling perspective? The whole fight in the BMF title recently? Probably not. It's not really what the BMF title is for. But I want to talk about why the cards, I think, have felt a bit underwhelming recently. And this might be the opportunity for MVP to take a little market share and have a chance at building a real competitor. So thanks, everybody, for hanging out, for stopping by. Those of you that did. We're going to hopefully do this a little more consistently in the mornings here. And yeah, it was fun. I appreciate everybody who hung out. And we will see you tomorrow.